Chapter 19 of Audrey Craven by May Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 19. In her appeal to Wyndham, Audrey had played a bold stroke, and it seemed that she had won it. She had amply revenged herself on Hardy, and more than assured herself of Wyndham's friendship. All the same, ever since she had left him at the doors of the Hotel Metropole, a certain constraint had crept into their intercourse. Wyndham was not easily deceived, and he rightly interpreted her abrupt dismissal of him as a final effort to assert herself before the onset of the inevitable. Even if he at times suspected her of playing a part, she had chosen the right part to play, and he respected her for it. He himself was leading a curious double life. He was working hard at his novel, which promised to surpass everything that he had yet done. He was so much absorbed in observing, studying, shaping, and touching up, that it never occurred to him to ask himself if he were indeed creating. The thing had been growing under his hands through the autumn. In the winter it seemed to advance by bounds, but in the spring his work came to a sudden standstill. He did not know what Laura, his heroine, was going to do next. He had drawn her as the creature of impulse, but dragging the dead weight of all the conventions at her back, a woman variously dramatic when stirred by influences from without, but incapable of decisive action from within. How would such a woman behave under stress of conflicting circumstances, if it came, say, to a fight for possession between the force of traditional inertia and the feeling of the moment? On the one hand, the problem was as old as the hills; on the other, it was new with every man and woman born into the world. What he called his literary conscience told him that it had to be solved. Another conscience in him shrank from the solution. At this point Wyndham did what, as a conscientious artist, he had never done before. He put his work away for a season, and tried not to think about it, devoting himself to Audrey Craven instead. Even he was not always able to preserve the critical attitude with regard to her. As he had told her, criticism comes first, sympathy last of all. And with him, last of all, it had come. He could not go on from day to day, seeing, hearing, and understanding more and more, without acquiring a curious sympathy with the thing he studied. And when the artist tired of her art, the man felt all the influence of her natural magic. He was prepared for that, and had no illusions on the subject. He tested his present feelings by comparing them with those he had had for Alison Fraser. He had not the least intention of setting up Audrey Craven anywhere near his idol's ancient place. He would have shuddered at the bare idea of it. This, though he expressed it differently, was what he meant when he resolved once for all that he would never marry, never put himself in any woman's power again. And in the plenitude of his self knowledge he knew exactly how far he could let himself go without either of these evil results following. Unfortunately in these cases the woman is seldom so well equipped for self defence as the man. Owing to her invincible ignorance of her own nature, she must be more or less at a disadvantage. And if this is true of women in general, it was doubly true of any one so specially prone to illusion as Audrey Craven, who would have had difficulty in recognizing any part of her true self under its numerous disguises. She was therefore unaware of the action and reaction which had been going on within her during the last year. Whatever its precise quality may have been, her love for Ted Haviland was of a different quality from her feeling for Langley Wyndham. Under that earlier influence, whatever intelligence she possessed had been roused from its torpor by the tumult of her senses. Her mind had been opened and made ready for the attack of a finer intellectual passion, which again in its turn brought her under the tyranny of the senses. For though her worst enemies could not call Audrey clever, it was Wyndham's intellectual eminence which had fascinated her from the first. Herein lay her danger and her excuse. She was aware, hence her late access of reserve, that she was being carried away by her feelings; but how, when, and whither, she neither knew nor apparently cared to know. In the meanwhile, in Wyndham's friendship, she not only triumphed over Vincent's scorn, but she felt secure against his infatuation. For she imagined the scorn and the infatuation as still existing together. She knew that he was still in London, presumably unable to tear himself away from her neighbourhood. And the sense of his presence, of his power over her, had been so long a habit of her mind that she could not lose it now. Otherwise she hardly gave him a thought, and having cut herself off from all communication with Devon Street, she did not certainly know what had become of him. She had yet to learn. Towards the end of February she received a letter from Vincent's mother which left no doubt on the subject. The news of his downfall had reached his home at last. Mrs. Hardy knew of her son's attachment to his cousin, and had always had fixed ideas on that point. On being told that he had gone irretrievably to the bad, she jumped to a conclusion. It was the right one, as it happened, though she had managed to cover a great deal of ground in that jump. She at once wrote off a long and violent letter to her niece, taxing her with cruelty, fickleness, and ingratitude, laying Vincent's misdeeds on her shoulders, and ending thus: "They tell me you are engaged. I pray God you may not have to go through what you have made my darling boy suffer." Now, either the poor hysterical lady was an unconscious instrument in the hands of destiny, or her prayer may have been meant as a modified and ladylike curse. At any rate, if it had not entered into her head to write that letter, it would have saved the writing of one chapter in her niece's history. But in the first place the communication had the effect of making Audrey cry a great deal for her. In the second, it came by an afternoon post, so that Langley Wyndham, calling at his usual hour, found her crying. He was a little taken aback by the sight, as indeed any man would have been, for most women of his acquaintance arranged things so as not to do their crying and calling hours. However, he judged it the truest kindness to sit down and talk as if nothing had happened. But it requires considerable self possession and command of language to sit still and talk about the weather with a woman's tears falling before you like rain. And even Langley Wyndham, that studious cultivator of phrases, found it hard. Audrey herself relieved him from his embarrassment by frankly drying her eyes and saying, "I beg your pardon, I didn't mean that to happen, but " He glanced at the letter open in her lap. "Not bad news, I hope?" "No," she answered, with a sob verging on the hysterical. Wyndham looked frightened at that, and she checked herself in time. "No, it's nothing. At least I can't speak about it. And yet, if I did, I believe I should feel better. I am so miserable." "I am truly sorry. I wish I could be of some use. If you thought you could speak about it to me, you know you can trust me." "I know I can. Oh, if I could only tell you! But I can't." "Why not? Would it be so very hard? I might be able to help you." "You might. I do want somebody's advice so much." "You are always welcome to mine. You needn't take it, you know." She smiled through her tears, for she had acquired a faint sense of humour under Ted's influence, and had not yet lost it. "Well, it's about Vince my cousin, Mr. Hardy. You remember meeting him here once?" "I do indeed." "You may remember something I told you about him then. Perhaps I ought not to have told you." "Never mind that. Yes, I remember perfectly. Has he been persecuting you again?" Yes. Well, no. I haven't seen him for ages, but I live in dread of seeing him every day. I know, sooner or later, he will come." She paused. "I wonder if I really could tell you everything." "Please do, or tell me as much as you care to. I'd like to help you if you would let me." She went on in a low voice, rather suggestive, Wyndham thought, of the confessional. "I was engaged to him once, long ago. He forced me into it. It began when we were children. He always made me do everything he wanted. Then he went away immediately after for a year. When he came back, I don't know how it was, I suppose it was because he had been away so long, but I was stronger. He seemed to have lost his hold over me, and I broke it off." She looked away from Wyndham as she spoke. He wondered, is she acting all the time? If so, how admirably she does it. She must be a cleverer woman than I thought. But she isn't a clever woman. Therefore But Audrey went on before he could draw a conclusion. "But I know some day he will come back and make it begin all over again, and I shall have no power. And the thought of it is horrible." There was no mistaking the passion in her voice this time. He said to himself, "This is nature," and he felt the same cold shiver of sympathy that sometimes ran through him at the performance of some splendid actress. But before he could presume to sympathize, he must judge. "Do you mind telling me one thing? Had you any graver reasons for breaking it off than what you have told me?" "Yes. He drinks." "Brute. That's enough. But Supposing he didn't drink? It would make no difference. I never cared for him. He thought I did. I couldn't help that, could I? And then afterwards so many things happened. I was not the same person. If he had not begun to do that, still it would have been impossible. But he won't believe it, or else he doesn't care. He'll persecute me again, and perhaps make me marry him." "My dear Miss Craven, he won't do that. People don't do those things in the 19th century. You've only got to state clearly that you won't have anything to say to him, and he can't do anything. If he tries to, there are measures that can be taken." She shook her head dismally. "Now comes the advice. Shall I tell you the truth? You've been worrying your brain over that wretched animal till your nerves are all upset. You're ill practically, or you couldn't take this morbid view of it. You ought to leave town and go away for a change." "Where could I go to?" "The South Coast for choice. It's bracing." "If I only could. No, I can't leave London." "Why not?" "There's an excellent service of trains." "Because because I love London." "Well, so do I, for many reasons. There's no place like it to my mind. But if I'd overworked myself in it I should tear myself away. You can have too much of a good thing." "No, not of the only place on earth you care to be in." "Well, I've given my valuable advice. You're not going to take it. I never thought you would. Personally, I hate the people who give me advice. What I should like to give you would be help. But the question is, am I able to give it? Have I even the right to offer it?" She looked up at him. Some lyric voice, whether of hope or joy or both, had called the soul for an instant to her face, a poor little fluttering soul that gazed out through her grey eyes at Wyndham, for an instant only, and was seen no more. When he spoke not to it, but to the woman he had known. "You don't answer." She had answered, and he knew it. "It all comes back to what I said long ago. The most elementary knowledge of life would have saved you all this. If you'd had it, you could not have let these fatuities worry you to this extent. Do you remember my telling you that you ought to love life for its own sake?" The moment he had said the words he would have given anything to recall them. But it was too late. She remembered only too well. However she had disguised the truth, Wyndham's passionate defence of realism was not altogether an appeal to her intellect. He ought not to have reminded her of that now. "Yes," she answered. "How could I forget?" "I said at the time that you must know life in order to love it, and I say so now. But, Audrey" she started and flushed "if I were another man I should not say that." "What would you say?" "That you must love in order to know." "Is there any need to tell me that now?" "Perhaps not. It's what I would have told you then if I had been another man." Her lip quivered slightly, and she held one hand with the other to give herself the feeling of a human touch. He went on without the least idea whether he were talking sense or nonsense, interrupted sometimes by his own conscience, sometimes by Audrey's changes of expression. "Bear with my egoism a moment several moments for I'm going to be tediously autobiographical. Once, when I was a young man, I was offered some journalistic work. It was at the very start. I had barely tasted print. Remember, I was ambitious, and it meant the beginning of a career. I was poor, and it meant a good salary. But it meant the production of a column of copy a day, whether I was in the vein for it or no. I wanted it badly, and I refused it. I could not be tied down. Since then I have never bound myself to any publisher or editor. This anecdote is not in the least interesting, but it is characteristic of my whole nature, which is my reason for inflicting it on you. That nature may be an unfortunate one, but I didn't invent it myself. Anyhow, knowing it as thoroughly as I do, I've made up my mind never to do certain things, never, for instance, to ask any woman to be my wife. Marriage is the one impossible thing. It involves duty, or worse still, duties. Now, as it happens, I consider duty to be the very lowest of moral motives. In fact, don't be shocked, it isn't moral at all. It is to conduct what authority is to belief. That is, it has nothing whatever to do with it. No. Goodness no more depends on duty than truth depends on authority. Forgive me. I know you are a metaphysician and a moral philosopher, and you'll appreciate this. You're going to make a quotation. Please don't. It's perfectly useless to tell me that Wordsworth calls duty "stern daughter of the voice of God." It may be. I don't know. I only know that if I believed it was my duty to live, I'd commit suicide to morrow. I don't like stern daughters. But granted that Wordsworth had the facts at his finger ends, God's voice is freedom, whatever its daughters may be. That's not a doctrine I'd preach to every one, but for me and those like me, freedom, absolute freedom, is the condition of all sane thinking and feeling. Fancy loving any one because it was your duty! Take a case. Supposing I married. The more I loved my wife, the less a free agent I should be. And when I once realized that I wasn't free, there would be an end of my love. I deplore this state of things, but I can't alter it. So you see, when I most want to give you love and protection, I can only offer you friendship, which you don't want perhaps, and good advice, which you won't take." But she was looking beyond him, far away. "As I can't possibly ask you to accept my conditions, perhaps the cleverest thing I could do would be to go away and never see you again. There's no other alternative." Her lips parted as if she would have spoken, but no words came. They searched each other's faces, the woman thirsting for life, for love, the man thirsting too for knowledge, and he knew. It was his turn to look away from her, and as he fixed his eyes absently on the corner where the Psyche stood motionless on her pedestal, he noticed, as people will notice at these moments, the ironical suggestion of the torso, with the nasty Malay frieze hanging over its head. Psyche and the sword of Damocles. "I don't want you to go away," she said, at last. "I am going, all the same. For a little while, a fortnight perhaps. I want you to have time to think." He was not by any means sure what he meant by that. He had solved his problem, though not quite as he had intended to, and that was enough for him. And yet his conscience not the literary one, but the other would not altogether acquit him of treachery to Audrey. Instead of going away, as he ought to have done, he sat on talking, in the hope of silencing the reproachful voice inside him, of setting things on their ordinary footing again. But this was impossible at the moment. They were talking now across some thin barrier woven of trivialities, as it were some half transparent Japanese screen, with all sorts of frivolous figures painted on it in an absurd perspective. And behind this flimsy partition their human life went on, each soul playing its part more or less earnestly in a little tragedy of temptation. Each knew all the time what the other was doing, though Wyndham had still the advantage of Audrey in this respect. Which of them would first have the courage to pull down the screen and face the solid, impenetrable truth? Neither of them attempted it; they dared not. After half an hour's commonplaces Wyndham left her to think. He too had some matter for reflection. He was not inhuman, and if at times he seemed so, he had ways of reconciling his inhumanity to his conscience. He told himself that his strictly impartial attitude as the student of human nature enabled him to do these things. He was as a higher intelligence, looking down on the crowd of struggling, suffering men and women beneath him, forgiving, tolerating all, because he understood all. He who saw life so whole, who knew the hidden motives and far off causes of human action, could make allowances for everything. There was something divine in his literary charity. What matter then if he now and then looked into some girl's expressive face, and found out the secret she thought she was hiding so cleverly from everybody, if he knew the sources of so and so's mysterious illness which had puzzled the doctors so long? And what if he had obtained something more than a passing glimpse into the nature of the woman who had trusted him? It would have been base, impossible in any other man, of course. The impersonal point of view, you see, made all the difference. End of chapter 19. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.